Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for my playthrough demo of a mission from the Hunt for Red October. Now, to try and show you all a little bit of how every aspect of the game works, I have taken the Atlantic Convoy scenario, which is one of my favorites. It's not too long. In fact, actually, it feels desperately short to both players. But I have modified it slightly because the basic aim, as the title implies, is for NATO to get a convoy which is starting from New York, and they have to get it all the way over to Le Havre over here. Now, they have to do this within 5 turns, so you can dance around the Soviet submarines, which are swarming in the mid-Atlantic to a degree, but you can't do it too much because you have to, those reinforcements you're bringing are desperately needed on the European front. Now, ordinarily, this scenario does not employ aircraft. It's a purely escorts versus submarines affair. However, because I wanted to show you all a little bit of everything, I have tweaked the scenario very slightly to include some aircraft on the NATO side. So you can see over there in the British Isles, they've got some anti-submarine aircraft. Because this map is so incredibly huge and my camera stand can't go back that far, I'm just going to have to do a bit of tilting so that you can see that there are additional aircraft on the NATO side. And way over there at that captured airbase in Norway, the Soviets have some assets as well. But the air advantage is very much with NATO in this one. They've got more planes, and to be honest, they're going to need them because, as you can see, there are a very large number of Soviet submarines in the Atlantic. Now, a couple of things before I start the game off. I realized when I was setting up for filming that having the vessel counters mounted in their handy dandy little standees was going to create problems because the angle would be all wrong and it would make it a little bit difficult for you guys to see what was going on. So what I've done is I've taken them off the standees and I've just laid them flat on the map so you can see what's going on. The other thing is, and I will beg your indulgence here, is that depending on whose side you're on, ordinarily these guys are all supposed to be flipped over. So you get the fog of war side of it. Now, those of you who know me well will know that my brain is a bit on the puny side. And even if I did the fog of war thing with just one side, I would confuse myself out of all usefulness. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is assume that fog of war is in place, and I'll ask you guys to assume the same. When a submarine or a surface vessel or a task force is detected, I will turn it upside down to indicate that it is visible to the enemy player. And then when it vanishes again, I will just put it the right way up. So I think that's all the housekeeping we need, except just to tell you what is in Task Force 1 over there in New York. So here is the task force display for NATO. So we have a very heavily defended convoy. That convoy token represents a very large number of merchant ships, so it cannot be destroyed outright. What happens is that every time a Soviet submarine, or in this case possibly aircraft, scores a hit on it, NATO will lose a merchant ship, and therefore the Soviet player will get points. Now, you might be wondering why, in a scenario that's primarily submarine warfare, I've stuck some ships in the anti-aircraft screen because I didn't need to do that. That has been done for play balance. Because I've given NATO such an advantage in aircraft, I've considered it fair if the task force sets sail on the understanding that there may be some Soviet aerial threats. So out of necessity, some of their precious ships have been allocated to anti-aircraft screening duties, which means they cannot operate in an anti-submarine role. I think and hope that balances things out. So, on to playing. The first thing that happens each turn is both sides roll initiative. An initiative is tied intrinsically with both sides' detection markers. Now, these are what allow you to try and pick out enemy ships, submarines, and aircraft in your area. If you place a detection marker with its radar side up, you're looking for a surface or aerial target. If you place its sonar side up, you're looking for a submarine. Now, these can be played reactively by submarines when an enemy moves through their area, or it can be played later during the turn when movement is completed. But I'll stop getting ahead of myself. Initiative. Each side starts the turn with two of these in their detection markers box. I'll give the Soviets their two. And that arm snaking across the map is me giving NATO their two as well. Regardless of your initiative dice roll, each side always gets two of those counters unless the scenario specifies otherwise. Then let's do initiative. Now, to represent their technological edge, which may or may not work well depending, NATO always rolls the 10-sided dice. The Soviet Union rolls the 6-sided. Okay, so they both have two. Interesting. Now, what that means is each side gets another two detection markers, which I'll just give them now. And unfortunately for NATO, in the event of a tie, the Soviet player gets the initiative. So now we get into the meat of the game. The first thing that happens is the first round of naval movement. Now, the player with the initiative can either move their units first or make the other player go first. And for the purposes of trying to build a good interception, the Soviets are going to make NATO go first. So, what have we got here? There's quite a few NATO submarines. Well, there's 4 Los Angeles class. And really, they want to be trying to cause trouble and run interference as much as they can for the convoy. So NATO is going to move those first. Now, those Soviet submarines have the option, as that Los Angeles moves in, of attempting an interception and detection. So they're going to do that. If they score points for sinking NATO submarines, so if they can whittle down their strength, that would be great. And because they want to make sure of that submarine, they're going to spend 2 tokens, 1 for each submarine they have in that area. The US submarine, having been on the receiving end of that, declares that it's going to counter. So I'm just going to check the counters because both of the submarines in there are the fast Alpha class SSNs. Each one of them has a detection rating of 4. When you're trying to detect a NATO submarine, you always subtract 2 from your rating, again, to represent the NATO advantage in tech and quieter subs. Now, because subs are inherently hard to find, NATO doesn't get off scot-free. They get a -1 to their detection rating. So what happens is, because the Soviets have played 2 detection markers, 1 for each sub, they get to roll 2 dice. And it's going to be a bit of a challenge because, because they need 2 or less on a D10. So this is going to be tricky. No, they do not detect the NATO submarine. Meanwhile, the NATO sub is going to try and detect one of them. And it succeeds handily. So one of the Soviet boats is detected. And bear with me. Sorry, I was just making sure I didn't have something out of order. Yep, so the NATO sub has detected one of its Soviet opposite numbers, which means they can instantly resolve a battle to see whether the NATO sub sinks it. So I'm going to bring the battle board in. You don't really need to do this because it's only two subs having a shootout. Now, because the Soviets didn't detect it, the NATO submarine, I think, well, where can I put this without knocking everything over? I'll just carefully put it down there. The NATO submarine can quite legitimately place itself in the attack second box. So we have our detected alpha. And the NATO submarine is the attacker in this one because it's detected the enemy and they have not seen it. So the Soviets don't have any good option. If they place their subs in the attack first box, then, sorry, let me move this up just a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. If they place their submarines in the attack first box, they've got nothing to shoot at. So what they're going to do, and actually come to think of it, if they place it in the attack second, it won't be brilliant. Because the NATO sub can still get its shot in. Combat is considered simultaneous. So under the normal rules, the NATO could get a hit and run attack with this. However, there is in the optional rules what they call a limited attack option, where a certain number of your units, I mean, it could be all of them if you want, are allowed to loiter for a third round. And they cannot take part in the first or the second attack round. But if they survive the second attack round, one of them may counterattack. So because they have no better options, the Soviets are going to put both their submarines on standby for limited attack because they know at least one of them is going to survive. So let's move on to the attack ratings. There's no first attack. Second attack, the NATO submarine is going to target the alpha that it can see. Now its attack rating is 4. And because it is a submarine making a surprise attack, it gets to roll a white dice rather than a red dice. So this is going to be quite devastatingly effective. And they score a hit. Submarines are destroyed on the first hit, so that rather luckless alpha is sunk and removed from the game. However, because they set it their other submarine for limited counterattack, the Soviets can have a crack back at the NATO sub. Now, because they're not detected, and the NATO sub has revealed its presence by firing, they get the same advantage. So they need a 4 or less on a d6. Ooh, nice. Okay, so the Soviet Navy has got some measure of revenge. And whatever that US sub was up to, it is now no longer a problem. And these counters go, they normally would go out of play, but I'm just going to leave them there as a reminder that markers were played. So that was a brief interruption to the NATO player's turn, but now he gets to continue what he was doing. So that was a bit unfortunate for him, really, but in an effort to continue his operations and force the Soviets into potentially losing some more submarines, he's going to carry on. He's going to move this lone Los Angeles up into that space with the two Akulas. Now again, as they did in the other space, the Soviets have the option of intercepting him as he moves in, or trying to, but they only have 2 detection markers left, and they're going to want to save at least one of those for the convoy. So, although it's been costly so far, the NATO player's strategy is working well. He's forcing the Soviet player to make a horrible choice between burning these and saving some for the convoy. So, the Soviet player, encouraged by what he's just had happen very close to the US coastline with his alphas, decides he's going to have one of his submarines on the lookout for the interloper. And the NATO player is going to do likewise. Now, unlike the Alpha, the Victor's got a slightly better detection rating. They've got 5 to the Los Angeles 6. So the Victor, because of the -2 penalty, it's treated as a 3 or less that it needs to get. So let's see how it does. Ah, no, they see nothing. And the Los Angeles, amazing. The Los Angeles has spotted one of the two Victors. So we get another combat. It's precisely the same situation we were in earlier. So without troubling us with the battle board again, I'm just going to say that the Los Angeles is going to go into attacking second. And the Russians, as they did before, for want of any better options, are going to put both their vessels in limited counterattack. So let's just roll for that US submarine. It gets to use the 6-sided dice again because it's a surprise attack. So there would have been no firing during the first phase. And the submarine now gets to do its attack second option. So go for the one it can see. And it misses. Oh no. Okay, it misses. And it reveals itself. That's not good. So both Soviet submarines are intact and one of them can counterattack. So it may as well be the one that was found by the Los Angeles. It, might as well have a crack back at the submarine that attacked it. So it does so. Because the Los Angeles... Oh, wait, no, let's not do that. Because if that one fires instead, it does reveal itself, but it gets to enjoy the surprise from not having been seen before. Unfortunately for it, but fortunately for the Los Angeles, it misses. So we have a couple of salvos of torpedoes going back and forth. But this time it was a bloodless exercise. So everyone goes back to their concealed state. So what else is NATO going to do? They can cause more trouble. Because the Victors are the more dangerous and formidable of the Soviet submarines, these two NATO subs are going to move into that zone. The Soviets are going to decline to try detecting them because they have one precious detection counter left. I should say, because I haven't mentioned it so far, just about everything that floats in this game has a speed of 3 when it comes to moving from one area to another. But the only exceptions to that are aircraft, which have their different speeds, which we'll see in a minute, and the Alpha class submarines, which are super fast. They move 4 spaces. Now, a special rule to be aware of is because of the slow merchant ships in the convoy, NATO Task Force 1 is restricted to a movement speed of 2. So that is not very encouraging for them. And it does mean they have to steer a fairly predictable course to get to Le Havre within 5 turns. So we've had the 2 NATO subs go in. What are they going to do? NATO itself is down to only 2 detection markers now. Actually, no, they're just going to hover, I think, because it's not their turn. So if the Soviets didn't try to intercept them, then they can't counter. It'll have to wait for the combat phase. So yes, they're just going to sit there ready to pick a fight if the Soviet submarines stay there. So the very last unit that's going to move is, of course, the convoy. And they're going to stick to coastal waters to begin with, because that NATO symbol there shows that there's a combination of SOSUS, the underwater sonar network, and regular patrols. So any Soviet moving into that space will find that it's subject to a free NATO detection effort, which is kind of what the convoy wants, really. So that's it for NATO's movement. It's now up to the Soviets. And as I've said, they have their one precious detection marker. So they are going... I'll just get these off now because there's no need to keep them hanging around. They're going to take a bit of a chance because it's going to be a bit tough attacking that convoy, but they want to harass it as much as they can. An important consideration for the Soviet submariners is that shallow water allows easier detection of submarines, so it will be a bit of an uphill fight for them. I mean, so far losses have been even, but it may be worth them getting in there to try having a crack at the merchant ship. So because they've only got one detection marker, they're only going to take the risk with one of their submarines. And it's going to be the Alpha. Now, moving in with the task force does not trigger any kind of detection. Only submarines can play a detection marker when another unit passes through their space. So submarines can't be part of a task force. However, because of the SOSUS patrol line, NATO does get a free crack at finding them. So we shall see whether that happens. And I think I just need to check the rules to see what the detection rating is. One mo. Okay, so they have a detection rating of 5, and because NATO has 2 spare detection counters, they will very happily play one to see what they can see over there. Now, again, because it's shallow water, the Soviet submarine advantage of -1 is effectively negated. So NATO will see this submarine on a 5 or less. And they see it. Now, they cannot attack it immediately, but during the combat phase, they will be able to, because their SOSUS network has alerted them that there's a submarine in the area. So, what else are the Soviets going to do? It really isn't that advisable to move everyone else because they can easily catch up with the convoy, and they don't really want to give the US submarines too much wiggle room. They've been doing a pretty good job of pinning them down. They also don't really want to move too close to the coast because the NATO side has very good reconnaissance aircraft and anti-submarine aircraft. So the further they can keep away from those, the better, really. So now we get to the combat. So we now get to the combat round, which is not what it's called in the turn steps, but I call it the combat round. So what happens is the player with the initiative, which is the Soviet Union, gets to play detection markers in an area first. Wait, hold on, I've skipped a step. I forgot all about aircraft. Having gone out of my way to include aircraft, I've forgotten all about the poor things. So starting with the Soviets, they have 2 squadrons available in their northern Norwegian base. They've got some Su-27 fighters, which are quite useful, but they're only medium ranged, so they can't really get that far down the Norwegian coast. And unless you want to come under surface-to-air missile fire, you don't really want to go past enemy-held air bases. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The furthest the Su-27s can get is down to the lower Norwegian Sea, which is not actually that great. They do have much longer ranged IL-38s, which can travel all the way down to about there. But unfortunately, that does them no good because all the NATO submarines are too far south. So the Soviets are not going to commit any air assets this turn. NATO, on the other hand, is sorely tempted to. So they are going to send one of these aircraft from the French coast. Oh, actually, are they? No, they're not. I'll tell you why they're not, because NATO only has one detection token itself. So they really want to use that with the convoy so that it can attack that submarine that's stalking them. So, okay. Had they had more tokens, what they could have done was fly this aircraft out over some of the areas where Soviet submarines are hanging out. You could then use your aircraft to do the detecting, which is very handy because you don't risk exposure of your other units. So it's a good thing to be able to do using your patrol aircraft in concert with surface or submarine units. So that was the aircraft phase, but we're not going to actually employ any aircraft this turn. There'll be a few more turns afterwards. So that basically covers all the maneuvering that you have within a turn, and everything after that for the rest of the turn is going to be about detection and combat. So the Soviets, not surprisingly, in the upcoming combat phase, will be trying to use their one remaining detection marker on that convoy. No, do you know what? I'm a complete fool. I am going to send this aircraft out because NATO had one more counter than I remembered because the convoy doesn't need it anymore. So this aircraft, with its range of 8, because it's long ranged, is going to go out here to join the group here. And it will be playing the other one to help the submarines detect the 2 victors that are in the vicinity. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm sorry for all my slight backtracking and hesitancies over how some of this works. You start off being pretty confident you remember how this thing works, and then you come up against a situation, go, oh, shall I? Shall I not do that? Shall I? Oh, I don't know. So apologies for the shilly-shallying, but I hope that I've made sensible dispositions. And when we come back in the next video, we will be seeing more combat. Not just interception. It works the same way, but in this one you actually just place your detection markers and go for your targets when you can see them. But I look forward to covering that with you in the next one. Hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and above all, I hope it's made sense. Down to me if it doesn't, and do let me know either way. And I really look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.